Every time I make a new fight in Boss Up, I push myself to make it crazier and more intense than the last. 15 bosses later, I've learned 2 core principles to making engaging bullet hell styled boss fights. After I figured these out, my bosses have only gotten more difficult and more exciting. With today's boss, I've put them to use more than ever before. Get ready for an insane boss fight. So what makes a good bullet hell boss? In my experience, there's 2 factors. The first of which is creating fear. Why do I want my players to feel fear when they see a new attack? Well, when a boss shoots 400 bullets in a single frame, the player's brain will try to interpret it all at once and become overwhelmed by the amount of information to take in. This moment of chaos makes the fights exciting, as your brain rapidly tries to process everything on screen. While it's important to create this feeling in the player, you also have to make sure that the player is able to learn and adapt to the chaos. The secret trick to making these overwhelming attacks fun is to create a learnable and repeatable pattern that the player can latch onto consistently and avoid taking damage from the fight. For example, this attack in the Bonesy boss fight summons hundreds of projectiles to dodge. While at first it seems completely ridiculous to avoid, eventually you'll notice that the bullets are rotating, always leaving a safe zone in between to slip into. Once you figure that out, all you have to do is move carefully in a circle to avoid taking damage. This is the core driving principle of all bullet hell attack patterns, and something that I picked on without even realizing and implemented in a lot of my earlier fights. Recently, I found another pattern in my favorite boss fights, and this one I think is the secret sauce that elevates a good bullet hell attack to a great one. So your attack creates fear, and it's learnable. You have a solid, well-designed attack, but there's just something missing. You find that the movement players have to engage in to avoid these attacks is just a little too simple, and you want to make the fight more difficult to test players more and make the fight more engaging. Do you crank up the rate of fire to make players move faster? Do you up the visual noise to make it even more overwhelming? Well, I think those methods can work, but there's definitely a better way to accomplish this. Add in a second element to the attack. Many attack patterns in Boss Up involve one type of projectile at a time. While these are fun to learn and overcome in their own right, players will naturally get good at recognizing circle patterns and responding to them over the course of the game, and there's only so many ways to present them that add difficulty once they figured this out, unless you add a second element. Take Waffle Time's second phase, where each attack launches syrup to dodge. Suddenly, the movement you learn to dodge the attack isn't sufficient, as the syrup creates a second element to dodge around and forces players to reconsider their approach. A basic circling pattern can be spiced up by introducing a vertical element that forces you to start and stop as you proceed through the circle, for example. With these principles in mind, let's start designing Boss Up's most difficult fight so far. As usual, I started off by designing the boss's look. I took inspiration from RPG final bosses like Sephiroth and Culex from Mario RPG, invoking that all-powerful anime god look that often comes alongside some of gaming's most intense bosses. His lower half is serpentine to give him a monstrous quality, and he's armored with spikes and bones to emphasize how deadly of a killer he is. The gray skin tone invokes heat and burning, as well as classic images of demons, and the dark red hair plays into the fire theming. Once I was happy with the design, I put him in the game and I started designing some attacks. I wanted to immediately test my multifaceted theory with a twist on the typical aim at the player and a fire attack pattern that appears in several bosses throughout the game. The player is very accustomed to dodging projectiles like this at this point, so it's important to switch it up with a second factor that makes it just a little more challenging to deal with. When a player comes too close to these projectiles, they'll explode and leave behind a large area of effect to dodge. Now players will not only have to counter the projectile itself, but the resulting explosion that controls the player's movable space. Next, I designed a circling attack that plays into both overwhelming the player and having 2 parts. As the pattern circles around the center point, it launches 3 projectiles instead of just 1, to create more visual intensity without changing the core approach to moving around it. On top of that, a projectile is shot in a line to the player every few seconds, ensuring that they aren't just mindlessly moving in a circle and keeping them on their toes. I also experimented with these principles as iterations of attacks from previous fights. This sweeping laser attack previously appeared in the dragon boss fight. Now it has a second element to make it much more difficult. The laser sweeps upwards, lighting the ground on fire as it goes and forcing the player to dodge roll through it in midair rather than on stable ground. The next attack aims to overwhelm the player with giant cross patterns that eat up the screen real estate. In reality, there is a fair bit of room to dodge between them, but their gigantic size makes them feel super imposing. After the initial drop, players will also simultaneously contend with the crosses rising back up while the others drop, providing a second aspect to consider in their movement. This halberd attack asks the players to contend with two moving attackers at once, while they control the space that the player is confined to with fire trails behind them. The player will have to move carefully between the birds themselves and consider how the fire will limit them even in their safe spaces between attacks. Next, the floor catches on fire, forcing the player to move up to a high platform to stay safe, controlling how much vertical space they have available to them simultaneously. Fire then rises from the ground with small gaps in between. Since the fireballs move side to side, the player has to pay attention and make sure they've found a safe space to stand just as the fireballs reach them, rather than finding a safe space when they spawn and just staying still while they pass by. Finally, the spear attack is a reminder that not all attacks have to be multifaceted to be fun. This attack focuses entirely on visual chaos and fear to remain exciting, asking the player to think on their toes and react on the fly to semi-random and unpredictable attacks. So that's how I used fear and multifaceting to create some of Boss Up's most intense bullet hell patterns. Do you think these look fun to dodge? As always, the link to the Discord is in the description, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with each exciting episode of the Devlog. I'll leave you with a full recording of the fight, so please enjoy.